Hello and welcome to your science course, my personal favorite, week 1. So today our agenda is first looking at what is inquiry, some of the benefits for both teacher and student, some strategies that I used in my 5th grade classroom, and then application to our North Carolina science standards. So what in the world is inquiry? So inquiry-based learning, IBL, is a student-centered approach driven by students' questions and their innate curiosity. So really honing in on what are they interested in? How can you engage them? Looking at their prior knowledge or their schema to drive your instruction. So here are some steps of how to learn, steps to learn to inquiry. So learning to use inquiry can be challenging for some because it's a different way of teaching and it's also a different way for students to learn. Oftentimes students are sitting there kind of like wanting the teacher to give exactly what they need to do or how to do something. Inquiry is kind of the backwards way of giving them a topic and then they have to figure out what to do. So giving them different prompts and maybe they need to make a product or they have to classify different things, and we'll look at different strategies. But inquiry is the teacher taking much more of a facilitator role opposed to standing up there lecturing, this is what the water cycle is, and here are the steps. Maybe seeing how the water cycles throughout and giving them different diagrams or simulations and that sort of thing. But they're using those observation skills. They're using their 5 senses. They're asking questions. They're debating about different concepts. It is making the students take more of an active role in their learning as opposed to a passive role of just sitting there and just taking it in. Hopefully they're listening during that direct instruction, but this is more of an indirect way. And you've probably learned about that in some of your other courses. And so there are different types or styles of inquiry. So the first way is structured, which is whole group, teacher directed, and students follow. So yes, they're still making a product. Yes, they're still asking questions and all of that, but it's much more whole group and the teacher is alongside them. Controlled is whole group and students provide specific instructions and resources, but they're not right there hands-on with them. But it is kind of step by step. Then guided is problem-based. So giving them a problem of there's a water contamination in the river. Where is that coming from? And they have to look at a map and see, oh, this farmer is using pesticides and that sort of thing. But they have a common goal, but they have to look at what is the problem or the scenario based, which is more of guided. And then free is students ask questions, then invest their questions, and it's more of an independent project. So for science, I started off the year with more structured. Structured and controlled was more of what I used. And then once I knew that they grasped the concept of inquiry, that I'm not going to give you the exact way to do it or the exact steps to how to do this. Then it was a little bit more guided. We did not do a whole bunch of free inquiry topics just because of time's sake, but towards the end, when after EOGs and teachers feel like they're just babysitting, then we did more of the free inquiry types. All right, let's look at benefits. So as a teacher, I was able to see those light bulb moments for students. I took more of a step back and was a facilitator rather than being up there talking the entire time. I feel like on inquiry-based days, I was not as tired as a teacher because I was not having to handle behavior issues or all these questions of all of this because they took the forefront of what they were learning. And my students were engaged literally the entire time because it was something they were interested in or I had hooked them in. And so they wanted to participate. They didn't want to have a behavior issue and be out of the classroom. They were excited to be in there. So with this engaging activity, with using inquiry, they wanted to be in the room. So rarely did I have behavior issues. And I worked at some tough schools, and that was kind of unheard of. So here are some strategies. So creating a theory, measuring and analyzing, and then developing a product. Okay. We're going to go through each one of these, and I'm giving you realistic examples of how I use them in the classroom. So creating a theory. This was at the very beginning of the year when we were talking about cells. So, and I took a screenshot of my 5th grade slides, and I said, what do all of these have in common? So I wanted them to know that it was a biotic factor rather than abiotic. And so they had to list out commonalities, but this is how I would start the lesson. Had I taught them anything? No. So some of them were like, oh, this is where they live, where they are, how big, small, but it's just creating a theory based on what they see. Some of them are right on the right track, some of them aren't. But we would go over these theories, and then I would be like, well, what about, and I would ask them questions, and then they would all start to get to that common goal of knowing that they're all living. Next is measuring and analyzing. So again, this is straight from a 5th grade. We are looking at different types of consumers, so animals. So it says, can you infer, predict what these animals might eat based on their teeth? So you can see the jagged are carnivores, and then the more rounded would be herbivores. But I didn't tell them that at the beginning. I just wanted them to think about what could they possibly eat. And then we had a whole discussion, and I was like, well, what about this? And I would ask them several questions just to get them on that track. But we had not talked about the different types of consumers before this. So this is kind of hooking them in. And then many of you were in my curriculum and instruction and assessment course, and we actually did this activity, but developing a product. For this one, I gave them a real world example of an x-ray technician, and their bulb blew. So they had to make a replica of an x-ray. So we would go through and actually create an x-ray and talk about how this might be, what does the skeletal system, and this was in place of us just saying, oh, the skeletal system gives you structure, and it consists of bones. Like, there was more to it, and they were actually able to see what an x-ray looks like based on the activity that we did. And then lastly, we're going to do application. So when you are developing these inquiry-based learning activities, first you need to look at the standards and break it down by their academic vocabulary, the concepts they need to know, and then decide on your structure. I always thought very, very surface level. So if I was doing cells, we first talked about living versus non-living. I needed them to understand that before we went into prokaryotic and eukaryotic, or single cell, multi-cell. They had to know living versus non-living first. So I always start very, very broad, very, very almost easy in the beginning, just to hook them in, get that confidence up. And then, so that's when you're deciding on your structure. How are you going to build? Each lesson should build on the previous lesson, and it shouldn't jump around. It should seem seamless. And then decide how you're going to start the lesson to engage those students. Okay? Is it going to be creating a theory? Is it going to be measuring and analyzing. Google is going to be your best friend. I use Google and all these different AIs just to get those creative thoughts of how am I going to teach this. I used them all the time. So use your resources, but it shouldn't be end all be all, because there's not a lot of inquiry-based learning going on in the schools, which hurts my science heart. But this is where you should start to get creative. How would you want to learn about the different type of consumers? Do you just want to do a sort, or do you want to look at different teeth and make models of it? That's what we did. And they were able to see that based on the teeth, you can tell what type of consumer. So thank you for listening to week 1 about inquiry. Hopefully you've gained some knowledge about it. And I hope you have a wonderful week. If you have any questions, please reach out.